Hey guys, tonight we step into Rome, the year 1492. The bells of the Eternal City are tolling, not in mourning but in anticipation. The papal conclave is about to begin, and the streets below the Vatican are crowded with merchants, gossiping housewives and cloaked ambassadors. You smell roasted chestnuts and sweat, hear the creak of mule carts over cobblestones, and catch a glimpse of cardinals in scarlet sweeping through guarded gates. Everyone is whispering the same name, Rodrigo Borgia, the man whose reputation for scheming is matched only by his reputation for seduction. You probably won't survive this, at least not with your innocence intact. So before we dive into the scandalous corridors of power, do me a favor, tap that subscribe button, because tonight's story is about the most perverted pope in history. Post your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious which corner of the world you're listening from, as we unravel this tale of power, lust, and corruption. And remember, whisper this history into your own night like a secret. You never know who might be listening. Now, let's walk into the marble heart of Renaissance Rome, where the incense is heavy, the marble floors polished, and the whispers sharper than daggers. The Rome you enter is not the saintly city you might imagine. Yes, the basilicas gleam, and the relics of saints lie under candlelight. But the taverns along the Tiber ring with laughter of courtesans. Gambling dens thrive a few streets away from churches. Bands of mercenaries swagger through piazzas, hired by competing noble families who treat Rome as a chessboard of power. The papal palace, instead of a citadel of holiness, is a stage for ambition. And Rodrigo Borgia, as you will quickly learn, plays the lead role with a smirk and a purse of gold. The Spanish-born cardinal had been in Rome for decades already, slowly rising like oil atop water. You see him striding through his luxurious palace as vice-chancellor of the church, his robes glittering, his servants scurrying, his coffers heavy from fees and bribes. He knows how to buy loyalty, sometimes with coins, sometimes with promises, and sometimes with the wink of an eye. Rome knows him as both cunning administrator and relentless pleasure seeker, the sort of man who attends mass in the morning and a masked revel in the evening, never quite confessing all of it. But to understand this Rome, you must imagine the Renaissance at its fullest bloom. Artists paint frescoes of muscular saints, merchants ship spices from the east, and scholars debate philosophy under candlelight. The printing press spreads new ideas, and with them, new doubts. Faith is still powerful, but money, beauty and desire compete just as fiercely for attention. In this climate, a man like Borgia flourishes, neither saint nor sinner alone, but a hybrid of both, wearing holiness like a costume while pursuing pleasure like a sport. The papal conclave of 1492 unfolds inside the Sistine Chapel, long before Michelangelo paints his ceiling masterpiece. You watch the scarlet-hatted cardinals shuffle in, their lips pursed in prayer, but their hands itching for bribes. Each one knows that the next pope will shape the fate of kingdoms, grant benefices, and enrich allies. Rodrigo Borgia, with his coffers already bulging, spreads gold like butter. Promises of offices, estates, and privileges flow from him like wine at a banquet. To one cardinal he offers a castle, to another, lucrative abbeys, to another still, perhaps the favour of his daughter. His campaign is shameless, and his rivals mutter, but secretly, many take the deal. Outside the chapel, you feel the tension. Merchants bet openly on the outcome, selling amulets of saints to those hoping for divine influence. Courtesans linger, knowing celebrations will follow. Ordinary Romans, weary of papal greed yet amused by its theatrics, joke that the conclave is less about the Holy Spirit and more about the spirit of gold. And in truth, when the smoke rises from the chapel chimney signaling election, the spirit of gold has triumphed. Rodrigo Borgia is now Pope Alexander VI. When the announcement rings out, bells toll and crowds cheer, not so much for holiness, but for the spectacle. You stand in the square, listening to the roar. Alexander VI steps forward in full papal regalia, yet you notice his sly smile, the glint of ambition in his eye. Rome is not deceived. Rome simply doesn't care. After all, a corrupt pope can also be an entertaining one. And in an age when sin is as common as wine, a pope who sins flamboyantly almost feels like one of the people. You might wonder, How could the church allow such a man to ascend? But remember, this is not the church of quaint humility. This is the church as political empire, with armies, fortresses, and treasuries. The Pope is not only spiritual shepherd, but ruler of the papal states. Power, not purity, often dictates the throne of St. Peter, and Rodrigo Borgia has mastered power. In the days following his election, you notice how the Vatican transforms. Where once corridors echoed with Latin chants, now they hum with music, chatter, and the click of high heels. Rodrigo installs his mistresses in comfortable apartments, parades his children openly, and rewards his supporters with glittering offices. The Holy Palace becomes something closer to a Renaissance court, half monastery, half pleasure house. Ambassadors from Spain, France, and Venice shuffle uneasily, recording scandalous reports to send home, but few dare challenge him directly, for his influence is vast. You find yourself wandering the streets at night, overhearing Romans talking about their new pope. Some mutter that the apocalypse must be near, if God allows such corruption. Others laugh, toasting the Pope's audacity. Step into one of his public audiences. The hall is lined with frescoes, the air thick with incense. Pilgrims kneel, nobles bow, ambassadors present letters, and there he sits, the vicar of Christ, nodding gravely while arranging marriages for his illegitimate children. The contradiction is breathtaking. You can almost hear history holding its breath, as if to say, surely this can't last. Yet it will, and it will grow darker. Already, whispers float through Rome about his private life. His long affair with Vanotta dei Catane has produced children who walk openly in papal gardens. Another mistress, the younger Giulia Farnese, is paraded so boldly that Romans nickname her the Pope's bride. Satirical poems spread across taverns, poking fun at the Holy Father's household. You can't help but smile at one of the crude verses, though you quickly hush yourself after all. Blasphemy is still dangerous. Everywhere you go, the contrast between sacred and profane slaps you in the face. A solemn procession of relics, one morning, followed by rumours of a banquet with acrobats and courtesans that very night. Alexander VI embodies this contradiction so completely that Rome itself feels like a stage built just for him. You almost begin to wonder if the line between sin and sanctity has dissolved entirely under the Renaissance sun, and perhaps that's the most unsettling part. Standing in Rome in 1492, you realise you are not just watching the rise of a pope, but the birth of a legend, the kind of story whispered across centuries, half history, half scandal. You see the people leaning closer, not away. You hear their laughter mixing with their outrage. You smell the roasted chestnuts mingling with the perfume of passing courtesans. You feel the cobblestones beneath your feet, the heat of the crowd, the strange excitement in the air. For in this city, in this year, holiness is not measured by piety, but by spectacle. And Pope Alexander VI, once Rodrigo Borgia, has just stepped into his role as the star performer of a drama that will shock Christendom. You are here, standing at the beginning of his papacy, and already you sense the chaos to come. The marble halls echo, the cardinals shuffle nervously, and outside, the eternal city pulses with anticipation. Rome has always been a city of contradictions, glory and ruin, virtue and vice, but under Alexander VI the scales will tip, and as you walk away from the square, the bells still ringing in your ears, you can't shake the feeling that you have just stepped into the eye of a storm. From the moment you watch Rodrigo Borgia rise to the papal throne, you can't help but wonder how a man with such a reputation ever made it this far. The answer lies in decades of carefully woven alliances, clever maneuvering, and a shameless embrace of opportunity. He didn't simply stumble into power. He sculpted his career like a sculptor chiseling marble, striking away doubts, carving out influence, and polishing his image until it gleamed with wealth and authority. And yet, beneath that surface polish, everyone in Rome knew what he was: ambitious, indulgent, and dangerously skilled. You trace his origins back to Spain, where he was born Rodrigo Lanzoli Borgia in 1431. His uncle, Alonso de Borgia, climbed the ecclesiastical ladder and became Pope Calixtus III. That papal connection opened every possible door for young Rodrigo. Imagine yourself as a teenager in Valencia, suddenly plucked from provincial obscurity and brought to the richest city in Christendom. You see the marble basilicas, the libraries heavy with manuscripts, the palaces dripping with wealth. Rodrigo absorbed it all, learning quickly that the church was not just about prayers and sacraments. It was a machine of politics, gold, and human desire. By the time he was in his 20s, Rodrigo had been made a cardinal. That's not because of his theological brilliance, mind you. Few ever praised his piety. Instead, it was the Borgia family name, the papal uncle's influence, and Rodrigo's own knack for persuasion. He was tall, handsome by Renaissance standards, with dark hair, sharp features, and a persuasive smile that could melt resistance. You picture him striding into a room full of jaded churchmen, charming one with a joke, bribing another with a gift, seducing yet another with flattery. It was a toolkit he would refine for decades. He was also made Vice-Chancellor of the Church, a role that sounds boring but was effectively the Pope's chief administrator, managing documents, offices, and money. Money, especially. You see him hunched over ledgers, not as a monk counting prayers, but as a banker counting profits, the fees flowing into Rome for dispensations, indulgences, and benefices passed through his hands, and Rodrigo knew exactly how to take his share. His wealth swelled, his estates expanded, and his palace became a place of gossip and envy. But Rodrigo's rise wasn't just about coins, it was about charisma and appetite. Even in an age when clerics openly fathered children, his boldness shocked. He lived as though vows of celibacy were polite suggestions rather than binding rules. You overhear whispers that he hosted lavish dinners with courtesans, that his banquets rivaled those of secular princes, and that his mistresses were treated like queens. Far from damaging his career, this reputation made him more notorious, more memorable, more talked about. In Renaissance Rome, obscurity was death. Infamy was power. One of his most enduring relationships was with Vanossa dei Catanei, a Roman woman with whom he fathered several children. You imagine the scenes. Rodrigo, already a cardinal, visiting her townhouse in the city, laughing with her over wine, watching his children grow under her roof. Far from hiding them, he acknowledged them, providing wealth and education. It was brazen, but also calculated. In a world where dynasties mattered, even a churchman needed heirs. Those children would later become pawns and princes in his broader game. He cultivated allies, just as carefully. In the Curia, the papal bureaucracy, he spread favors like seeds in a fertile field. He granted positions, secured benefices, and forged bonds with powerful families. When disputes erupted, Rodrigo positioned himself as mediator, the man who could make deals smooth and outcomes favorable. He wasn't known for great sermons or deep theological debates. Instead, he was known as a reliable ally, someone who could get things done, and in politics, competence often outweighs morality. When rival cardinals plotted against him, he outspent them. When noble families tried to undermine him, he seduced their members into friendship, or something more intimate. If ever there was a scandal, Rodrigo managed to redirect it, or bury it beneath gold. The city learned that crossing him rarely ended well. You see it in the nervous smiles of ambassadors who address him, the way their voices soften when they speak of him, as if they're both amused and a little afraid. His Spanish roots also mattered, at a time when Italy was divided into warring states: Florence, Venice, Naples, Milan. Rodrigo drew on his Iberian connections, securing loyalty from Spanish cardinals and favor from the Crown of Aragon. His dual identity, Spanish by birth and Roman by career, gave him a unique edge. He could play both sides, cultivating an international base of power that reached far beyond the walls of Rome. Of course, his enemies never disappeared. Many cardinals despised him, muttering that he embodied the corruption of the church. But as long as he controlled money and influence, their mutters went nowhere. Some joked that Rodrigo Borgia's greatest miracle was turning gold into obedience, and perhaps they were right. His skill at buying loyalty was so consistent that by the time Pope Innocent VIII died in 1492, Rodrigo was the obvious front-runner for the papacy, despite or perhaps because of his scandalous life. Imagine walking into his palace on the eve of that conclave. You would see marble floors gleaming with candlelight, servants bearing trays of fruit and wine, and cardinals discreetly slipping in and out. Rodrigo greets each guest warmly, whispering promises, placing hands on shoulders, slipping notes into pockets. The atmosphere is equal parts negotiation and seduction. By morning, many of those guests have pledged their votes, not because of holiness, but because Rodrigo Borgia made them feel chosen, rewarded, and bound by secret debts. In this way, his rise feels almost inevitable, not ordained by heaven, but constructed by human will and cunning. He climbed each rung of the ladder with eyes wide open, never pretending to be more virtuous than he was. That honesty, if you can call it that, was strangely disarming. For decades before becoming Pope, Rodrigo had already been living as if he ruled. His vice-chancellorship gave him practical power, his wealth gave him material comfort, his children gave him dynastic reach. All that was missing was the title, and when it finally arrived, it felt like a coronation long prepared. You can almost hear him thinking, at last the stage matches the actor. And yet, standing in Rome and watching this ascent, you feel the chill of irony. For all his charm and cleverness, Rodrigo's rise also marked the deepening root of the church. The institution meant to shepherd souls had become a theatre for ambition, and its most notorious performer was about to seize the lead role. That realization, heavy as incense, lingers in the air as the bells of 1492 ring and the Borgia era begins. From the moment Alexander VI takes the throne, the Vatican begins to shed its skin. What had once been a fortress of solemn prayers and cautious rituals slowly transforms into something closer to a princely court, half palace, half stage. You walk through its marble corridors and sense the change in the very air. The scent of incense is still present, but now it mingles with perfumes from Venice, roasted meats from lavish kitchens, and the faint smoke of torches preparing for night-long festivities. It no longer feels like the house of God. It feels like the house of Borgia. Everywhere you turn, extravagance glitters. The Pope's chambers are hung with velvet tapestries, embroidered in gold threads. Silver candelabra line the halls, their flames dancing off marble floors polished like mirrors. Servants rush past carrying platters of sugared almonds, exotic fruits, and wine so rich it clings to the cup. The solemnity of monks in brown habits seems almost laughably out of place amid this splendor. If you didn't know better, you would swear you were wandering through the palace of a secular king. Banquets become the hallmark of Alexander's papal court. You attend one in the Grand Hall of the Apostolic Palace, and it is unlike anything you expected from the successor of St. Peter. Long tables groan under roasted peacocks with gilded feathers, whole sturgeons stuffed with herbs, pyramids of candied fruits, and rivers of wine flowing in crystal carafes. Musicians play lutes and shawms while acrobats flip in the background. Courtesans, laughing too loudly for propriety, weave among cardinals and ambassadors, their jeweled hair catching the candlelight. You can't help but notice how easily vows of celibacy dissolve in the presence of silk and song. The Pope himself sits at the head, beaming, raising his goblet to toast one guest after another. His children sit nearby, Cesare and Lucrezia, one treated openly as princes and princesses rather than illegitimate offspring. Their presence scandalizes many, but Alexander does not care. To him they are proof of his virility, symbols of his dynasty, and tools for alliances yet to come. You watch him laugh with them, feed them morsels from golden plates, and for a moment you almost forget he is meant to be the vicar of Christ. These gatherings are more than entertainment, they are weapons of power. Ambassadors are dazzled into compliance. Cardinals are softened by pleasure and bribed with gifts. Noble families are bound to the Pope by marriage alliances, sealed over dessert courses. What seems like indulgence is also strategy, though admittedly, strategy dipped in honey and wine. You realize that in Alexander's court, temptation is not a weakness but a form of currency. The Vatican gardens, too, take on a new life. Once spaces for meditation, they are now venues for masquerades and torchlit dances. Imagine strolling beneath orange trees heavy with fruit, hearing laughter echo off the walls, and seeing masked dancers whirl beneath the stars. Courtesans in shimmering gowns recline on benches, fanning themselves, while bishops whisper in their ears. It is a world where boundaries blur, where sacred titles mean little, and where pleasure is as visible as prayer. Luxury extends to the papal wardrobe itself. Alexander parades in robes of cloth of gold embroidered with pearls trimmed with ermine. His mitres sparkle with gemstones. His rings weigh down his fingers. When he blesses a crowd, the gesture seems less an act of humility than an exhibition of splendour. Satirists joke that the Pope glitters so brightly you can see him from Florence, and while some whisper in horror, others are captivated. After all, in an age obsessed with display, Alexander VI is a master showman. Foreign visitors record their astonishment. A German envoy writes of the Pope's court as more theatrical than holy. A Venetian ambassador describes with both admiration and disgust the constant feasting, the dancing girls, the endless gifts of jewels. For some, it is proof of corruption. For others, proof that Rome has reclaimed its glory as the centre of the world. Either way, no one leaves the Vatican without a story to tell. But extravagance has its costs. The papal treasury bleeds silver faster than it can be refilled. Indulgences are sold more aggressively, offices auctioned, and favours granted at steep prices. You walk past pilgrims in rags outside St. Peter's, their arms squeezed for coins that will pay for yet another banquet. The contrast between their hunger and the Pope's feasts is painful. But in Alexander's Rome, appearances matter more than conscience. The courtiers who thrive in this atmosphere are a peculiar breed, half cleric, half sycophant. You overhear them competing in flattery, praising not only the Pope's wisdom but his dancing, his taste in women, his laughter. Some do it cynically, others seem genuinely seduced by the glamour. To belong to Alexander's circle is to bask in a light brighter than virtue itself, and many are willing to abandon scruples for the glow. Not everyone plays along, of course. A few cardinals mutter in disgust, refusing invitations to feasts. Preachers thunder from pulpits about the moral decay at the heart of Christendom, but their voices are drowned out by music and laughter. For every sermon against corruption, there are 10 songs sung in taverns, mocking the hypocrisy. Rome, ever pragmatic, shrugs. If sin is inevitable, at least let it be entertaining. You find yourself one evening wandering through the papal apartments after a banquet. The floors are sticky with spilled wine, candles gutter low, and laughter still echoes faintly. In one corner, a bishop snores drunkenly on a bench. In another, courtesans giggle as they gather their gowns. The Pope has long since retired, no doubt the arms of one of his companions. The Vatican feels less like a temple and more like the aftermath of a carnival. This court, you realize, is not an accident. It is a statement. Alexander VI is showing the world that he is not bound by the old rules of papal modesty. He intends to rule like a Renaissance prince, dazzling allies, intimidating enemies, and making pleasure a part of politics. His court is a mirror of himself, indulgent, cunning, shameless, and alive with spectacle. And strangely, it works. For all the murmurs of scandal, his authority grows. Kings and dukes write letters dripping with flattery, eager to be in his favour. Bishops line up for offices. Artists and poets find patronage. Even critics cannot ignore his charisma. You sense that the very excess that horrifies some is the secret to his power. He overwhelms opposition with sheer audacity, daring anyone to challenge him. Still, the unease lingers. Beneath the laughter and jewels, you catch glimpses of tension. Guards whisper of conspiracies. Servants scurry nervously when the Pope's temper flares. And always, there is the sense that indulgence taken too far breeds enemies. The Vatican may gleam like a palace, but shadows gather at its edges. You can almost hear the whisper of plots forming in the dark corners of Rome. Yet, for now, Alexander VI basks in his triumph. The Vatican is his theatre, Rome his audience, and you, along with every ambassador, cardinal, and courtier, are compelled to watch. The curtain has only just risen on his papacy, and already the spectacle is dazzling, shocking, unforgettable. Whether it will end in glory or disaster, no one can yet say. But tonight, as torches flare and music drifts across the Tiber, you know one thing: the papal court has never looked or behaved like this before. And as you drift away from the glittering halls, the echo of laughter still in your ears, you feel the weight of history pressing down. This is no ordinary pope. This is Alexander VI, the most perverted pontiff in memory, and his reign of decadence has only just begun. From the moment Alexander VI takes the throne, the Vatican begins to shed its skin. What had once been a fortress of solemn prayers and cautious rituals slowly transforms into something closer to a princely court, half palace, half stage. You walk through its marble corridors and sense the change in the very air. The scent of incense is still present, but now it mingles with perfumes from Venice, roasted meats from lavish kitchens, and the faint smoke of torches preparing for night-long festivities. It no longer feels like the house of God, it feels like the house of Borgia. Everywhere you turn, extravagance glitters. The Pope's chambers are hung with velvet tapestries, embroidered in gold threads. Silver candelabra line the halls, their flames dancing off marble floors polished like mirrors. Servants rush past carrying platters of sugared almonds, exotic fruits and wine so rich it clings to the cup. The solemnity of monks in brown habits seems almost laughably out of place amid this splendor. If you didn't know better, you would swear you were wandering through the palace of a secular king. Banquets become the hallmark of Alexander's papal court. You attend one in the grand hall of the Apostolic Palace, and it is unlike anything you expected from the successor of St. Peter. Long tables groan under roasted peacocks with gilded feathers, whole sturgeons stuffed with herbs, pyramids of candied fruits, and rivers of wine flowing in crystal carafes. Musicians play lutes and shawms while acrobats flip in the background. Courtesans, laughing too loudly for propriety, weave among cardinals and ambassadors, their jeweled hair catching the candlelight. You can't help but notice how easily vows of celibacy dissolve in the presence of silk and song. The Pope himself sits at the head, beaming, raising his goblet to toast one guest after another. His children sit nearby, Cesare, Lucrezia, on, treated openly as princes and princesses rather than illegitimate offspring. Their presence scandalizes many, but Alexander does not care. To him they are proof of his virility, symbols of his dynasty, and tools for alliances yet to come. You watch him laugh with them, feed them morsels from golden plates, and for a moment you almost forget he is meant to be the vicar of Christ. These gatherings are more than entertainment, they are weapons of power. Ambassadors are dazzled into compliance. Cardinals are softened by pleasure and bribed with gifts. Noble families are bound to the Pope by marriage alliances, sealed over dessert courses. What seems like indulgence is also strategy, though admittedly, strategy dipped in honey and wine. You realize that in Alexander's court, temptation is not a weakness but a form of currency. The Vatican gardens too take on a new life. Once spaces for meditation, they are now venues for masquerades and torchlit dances. Imagine strolling beneath orange trees, heavy with fruit, hearing laughter echo off the walls, and seeing masked dancers whirl beneath the stars. Courtesans in shimmering gowns recline on benches, fanning themselves while bishops whisper in their ears. It is a world where boundaries blur, where sacred titles mean little, and where pleasure is as visible as prayer. Luxury extends to the papal wardrobe itself. Alexander parades in robes of cloth of gold embroidered with pearls trimmed with ermine. His mitres sparkle with gemstones. His rings weigh down his fingers. When he blesses a crowd, the gesture seems less an act of humility than an exhibition of splendor. Satirists joke that the Pope glitters so brightly you can see him from Florence, and while some whisper in horror, others are captivated. After all, in an age obsessed with display, Alexander VI is a master showman. Foreign visitors record their astonishment. A German envoy writes of the Pope's court as more theatrical than holy. A Venetian ambassador describes with both admiration and disgust the constant feasting, the dancing girls, the endless gifts of jewels. For some it is proof of corruption, for others, proof that Rome has reclaimed its glory as the center of the world. Either way, no one leaves the Vatican without a story to tell. But extravagance has its costs. The papal treasury bleeds silver faster than it can be refilled. Indulgences are sold more aggressively, offices auctioned, and favors granted at steep prices. You walk past pilgrims in rags outside Peter's, their arms squeezed for coins that will pay for yet another banquet. The contrast between their hunger and the Pope's feasts is painful, but in Alexander's Rome, appearances matter more than conscience. The courtiers who thrive in this atmosphere are a peculiar breed, half cleric, half sycophant. You overhear them competing in flattery, praising not only the Pope's wisdom but his dancing, his taste in women, his laughter. Some do it cynically. Others seem genuinely seduced by the glamour. To belong to Alexander's circle is to bask in a light brighter than virtue itself, and many are willing to abandon scruples for the glow. Not everyone plays along, of course. A few cardinals mutter in disgust. A few cardinals mutter in disgust, refusing invitations to feasts. Preachers thunder from pulpits about the moral decay at the heart of Christendom, but their voices are drowned out by music and laughter. For every sermon against corruption, there are 10 songs sung in taverns mocking the hypocrisy. Rome, ever pragmatic, shrugs. If sin is inevitable, at least let it be entertaining. You find yourself one evening wandering through the papal apartments after a banquet. The floors are sticky with spilled wine, candles gutter low, and laughter still echoes faintly. In one corner, a bishop snores drunkenly on a bench. In another, courtesans giggle as they gather their gowns. The Pope has long since retired, no doubt to the arms of one of his companions. The Vatican feels less like a temple and more like the aftermath of a carnival. This court, you realize, is not an accident. It is a statement. Alexander VI is showing the world that he is not bound by the old rules of papal modesty. He intends to rule like a Renaissance prince, dazzling allies, intimidating enemies, and making pleasure a part of politics. His court is a mirror of himself, indulgent, cunning, shameless, and alive with spectacle. And strangely, it works. For all the murmurs of scandal, his authority grows. Kings and dukes write letters dripping with flattery, eager to be in his favour. Bishops line up for offices. Artists and poets find patronage. Even critics cannot ignore his charisma. You sense that the very excess that horrifies some is the secret to his power. He overwhelms opposition with sheer audacity, daring anyone to challenge him. Still, the unease lingers. Beneath the laughter and jewels, you catch glimpses of tension. Guards whisper of conspiracies. Servants scurry nervously when the Pope's temper flares. And always, there is the sense that indulgence taken too far breeds enemies. The Vatican may gleam like a palace, but shadows gather at its edges. You can almost hear the whisper of plots forming in the dark corners of Rome. Yet for now, Alexander VI basks in his triumph. The Vatican is his theatre, Rome his audience, and you, along with every ambassador, cardinal and courtier, are compelled to watch. The curtain has only just risen on his papacy, and already the spectacle is dazzling, shocking, unforgettable. Whether it will end in glory or disaster, no one can yet say. But tonight, as torches flare and music drifts across the Tiber, you know one thing: the papal court has never looked or behaved like this before. And as you drift away from the glittering halls, the echo of laughter still in your ears, you feel the weight of history pressing down. This is no ordinary pope. This is Alexander VI, the most perverted pontiff in memory, and his reign of decadence has only just begun. From the moment Alexander VI takes the throne, the Vatican begins to shed its skin. What had once been a fortress of solemn prayers and cautious rituals slowly transforms into something closer to a princely court, half palace, half stage. You walk through its marble corridors and sense the change in the very air. The scent of incense is still present, but now it mingles with perfumes from Venice, roasted meats from lavish kitchens, and the faint smoke of torches preparing for night-long festivities. It no longer feels like the house of God. It feels like the house of Borgia. Everywhere you turn, extravagance glitters. The Pope's chambers are hung with velvet tapestries, embroidered in gold threads. Silver candelabra line the halls, their flames dancing off marble floors polished like mirrors. Servants rush past carrying platters of sugared almonds, exotic fruits and wine so rich it clings to the cup. The solemnity of monks in brown habits seems almost laughably out of place amid this splendor. If you didn't know better, you would swear you were wandering through the palace of a secular king. Banquets become the hallmark of Alexander's papal court. You attend one in the Grand Hall of the Apostolic Palace, and it is unlike anything you expected from the successor of St. Peter. Long tables groan under roasted peacocks with gilded feathers, whole sturgeons stuffed with herbs, pyramids of candied fruits, and rivers of wine flowing in crystal carafes. Musicians play lutes and shawms while acrobats flip in the background. Courtesans, laughing too loudly for propriety, weave among cardinals and ambassadors, their jeweled hair catching the candlelight. You can't help but notice how easily vows of celibacy dissolve in the presence of silk and song. The Pope himself sits at the head, beaming, raising his goblet to toast one guest after another. His children sit nearby, Cesare and Lucrezia, one treated openly as princes and princesses rather than illegitimate offspring. Their presence scandalizes many, but Alexander does not care. To him they are proof of his virility, symbols of his dynasty, and tools for alliances yet to come. You watch him laugh with them, feed them morsels from golden plates, and for a moment you almost forget he is meant to be the vicar of Christ. These gatherings are more than entertainment, they are weapons of power. Ambassadors are dazzled into compliance. Cardinals are softened by pleasure and bribed with gifts. Noble families are bound to the Pope by marriage alliances, sealed over dessert courses. What seems like indulgence is also strategy, though admittedly, strategy dipped in honey and wine. You realize that in Alexander's court, temptation is not a weakness but a form of currency. The Vatican gardens, too, take on a new life. Once spaces for meditation, they are now venues for masquerades and torchlit dances. Imagine strolling beneath orange trees heavy with fruit, hearing laughter echo off the walls, and seeing masked dancers whirl beneath the stars. Courtesans in shimmering gowns recline on benches, fanning themselves, while bishops whisper in their ears. It is a world where boundaries blur, where sacred titles mean little, and where pleasure is as visible as prayer. Luxury extends to the papal wardrobe itself. Alexander parades in robes of cloth of gold embroidered with pearls trimmed with ermine. His mitres sparkle with gemstones. His rings weigh down his fingers. When he blesses a crowd, the gesture seems less an act of humility than an exhibition of splendor. Satirists joke that the Pope glitters so brightly you can see him from Florence, and while some whisper in horror, others are captivated. After all, in an age obsessed with display, Alexander VI is a master showman. Foreign visitors record their astonishment. A German envoy writes of the Pope's court as more theatrical than holy. A Venetian ambassador describes with both admiration and disgust the constant feasting, the dancing girls, the endless gifts of jewels. For some, it is proof of corruption. For others, proof that Rome has reclaimed its glory as the center of the world. Either way, no one leaves the Vatican without a story to tell. But extravagance has its costs. The papal treasury bleeds silver faster than it can be refilled. Indulgences are sold more aggressively, offices auctioned, and favors granted at steep prices. You walk past pilgrims in rags outside St. Peter's, their arms squeezed for coins that will pay for yet another banquet. The contrast between their hunger and the Pope's feasts is painful. But in Alexander's Rome, appearances matter more than conscience. The courtiers who thrive in this atmosphere are a peculiar breed, half cleric, half sycophant. You overhear them competing in flattery, praising not only the Pope's wisdom but his dancing, his taste in women, his laughter. Some do it cynically, others seem genuinely seduced by the glamour. To belong to Alexander's circle is to bask in a light brighter than virtue itself, and many are willing to abandon scruples for the glow. Not everyone plays along, of course. A few cardinals mutter in disgust, refusing invitations to feasts. Preachers thunder from pulpits about the moral decay at the heart of Christendom, but their voices are drowned out by music and laughter. For every sermon against corruption, there are 10 songs sung in taverns, mocking the hypocrisy. Rome, ever pragmatic, shrugs. If sin is inevitable, at least let it be entertaining. You find yourself one evening wandering through the papal apartments after a banquet. The floors are sticky with spilled wine, candles gutter low, and laughter still echoes faintly. In one corner, a bishop snores drunkenly on a bench. In another, courtesans giggle as they gather their gowns. The Pope has long since retired, no doubt the arms of one of his companions. The Vatican feels less like a temple and more like the aftermath of a carnival. This court, you realize, is not an accident. It is a statement. Alexander VI is showing the world that he is not bound by the old rules of papal modesty. He intends to rule like a Renaissance prince, dazzling allies, intimidating enemies, and making pleasure a part of politics. His court is a mirror of himself, indulgent, cunning, shameless, and alive with spectacle. And strangely, it works. For all the murmurs of scandal, his authority grows. Kings and dukes write letters dripping with flattery, eager to be in his favour. Bishops line up for offices. Artists and poets find patronage. Even critics cannot ignore his charisma. You sense that the very excess that horrifies some is the secret to his power. He overwhelms opposition with sheer audacity, daring anyone to challenge him. Still, the unease lingers. Beneath the laughter and jewels, you catch glimpses of tension. Guards whisper of conspiracies. Servants scurry nervously when the Pope's temper flares. And always, there is the sense that indulgence taken too far breeds enemies. The Vatican may gleam like a palace, but shadows gather at its edges. You can almost hear the whisper of plots forming in the dark corners of Rome. Yet, for now, Alexander VI basks in his triumph. The Vatican is his theatre, Rome his audience, and you, along with every ambassador, cardinal, and courtier, are compelled to watch. The curtain has only just risen on his papacy, and already the spectacle is dazzling, shocking, unforgettable. Whether it will end in glory or disaster, no one can yet say. But tonight, as torches flare and music drifts across the Tiber, you know one thing: the papal court has never looked or behaved like this before. And as you drift away from the glittering halls, the echo of laughter still in your ears, you feel the weight of history pressing down. This is no ordinary pope. This is Alexander VI, the most perverted pontiff in memory, and his reign of decadence has only just begun. If nepotism built the scaffolding of Alexander VI's power, his mistresses furnished its chambers. You stroll through the Vatican and quickly realize that holiness here does not exclude the company of women. In fact, it often seems to celebrate it. Where earlier popes tried to disguise their liaisons, Alexander is shameless. He not only keeps mistresses, he installs them openly within papal walls, as if daring the world to protest. You wander into one such banquet and watch Julia seated near the Pope. Alexander gazes at her with the satisfaction of a man flaunting treasure. Cardinals shift uncomfortably, some pretending not to notice, others leering openly. The courtesans whisper and giggle. The musicians strike up a love song that feels just a little too pointed. Everyone knows, no one dares object. The Vatican has become a theatre of indulgence, and the lead actress plays her role with poise. Romans relish the scandal. Satirical poems flood the taverns, lampooning the Holy Father who embraces fatherhood in every sense. Caricatures show Julia in papal robes, blessing the people. Street singers croon ditties about her golden hair, tangled with the Pope's triple crown. You overhear one in the market and watch the crowd laugh until tears run down their faces. It is blasphemy, but in a city this jaded, blasphemy is entertainment. The Pope's court becomes a magnet for beautiful women. Courtesans of Rome angle for invitations, hoping to be noticed. Noble families, astonishingly, sometimes offer their daughters, believing proximity to Alexander will mean patronage. You overhear whispers of young women escorted into papal chambers at night, their families waiting expectantly for favours in return. The Vatican, once cloaked in solemnity, now hums with the intrigues of love affairs. Alexander showers her with gifts. Villas, estates, jewels. You wander through one of these villas on the outskirts of Rome, marvelling at frescoed walls, lush gardens and fountains bubbling under orange trees. It is less a lover's retreat than a palace, a reminder that in this papacy, even passion is draped in wealth. Servants bustle through halls, courtiers visit with petitions, and Julia presides with the calm authority of someone who knows her place is secure. The contrast with Venozza could not be sharper. She, the mother of the Pope's children, embodies respectability and stability. Julia, youth and beauty. Yet Alexander refuses to abandon either. He maintains his connection with Venozza, honouring her role as matron of the Borgias, while flaunting Julia as his glittering prize. Rome gossips endlessly about this triangle, but Alexander seems immune. To him, women are not secrets or scandals. They are emblems of his own potency, displayed without apology. Ambassadors scribble shocked reports to their courts. In Spain, Isabella the Catholic shakes her head in dismay. In France, whispers about papal corruption spread. But outrage never translates into real action. Kings may disapprove, but they still need papal alliances, dispensations and favours. Thus the mistresses remain untouchable, shielded by the sheer indispensability of the papacy. You marvel at the paradox. The Pope's sins are obvious to all, yet his power makes them unassailable. Inside the Vatican, meanwhile, courtiers adjust. Bishops avert their eyes when Julia passes. Servants bow deeper. Cardinals learn to address her with courtesy, lest they fall from papal favour. In a strange way, she becomes a semi-official presence, an unspoken office within the Church, mistress of the Pope. The title may be scandalous, but in practice it carries more influence than most cardinals. And Julia herself, you study her closely at a feast one evening. She laughs easily, speaks gently, and seems less predator than pawn. Perhaps she truly loves the Pope. Perhaps she endures him for her family's rise. Either way, she wears her role with elegance, as if aware that history will remember her whether she wills it or not. There is a melancholy in her eyes, a glimmer of awareness that beauty fades, power shifts, and Rome's love is fickle. But for now, she reigns. The Vatican thus becomes a house divided, not between reformers and conservatives, but between mistresses. Venozza's established dignity anchors the family, Julia's radiance dazzles the court, and lesser liaisons flit in and out, like moths. The Pope, meanwhile, revels in it all. He seems to draw energy from the very scandal that others believe should destroy him. Where another man might feel shame, Alexander VI feels triumph. You leave one banquet shaken, the scent of roses still clinging to your clothes, the sound of Julia's laughter echoing in your ears. Outside, the streets buzz with the latest verse mocking the holy household, and you realize that the Vatican under this Pope has become not a sanctuary but a stage, where mistresses walk proudly through papal chambers, ambassadors grit their teeth, and the people watch with a mixture of horror and delight. In the end, the mistresses of Alexander VI symbolize more than personal indulgence. They are proof of his audacity, his refusal to bow to convention, and his transformation of the papacy into a realm where family, beauty, and desire rule as openly as prayer. Rome will never forget their presence. Neither, after walking these gilded corridors yourself, will you. You can't walk far in Rome without hearing the names of the Borgia children whispered, sung, or cursed. They are the jewels of Alexander VI's dynasty, and at the same time, the thorns in its side. Everyone knows them. Cesare, Juan, Lucrezia, Geoffrey. They are not hidden in monasteries or kept in shadows as previous popes might have done with illegitimate children. No, they parade openly through streets, ride in processions, and occupy titles once reserved for king's heirs. You watch them grow into characters as vivid as their father, each moulded for his ambitions, each bound by his schemes. Cesare is the first to command your attention. Tall, charismatic, quick-witted, he embodies everything dangerous about the Borgias. Though made a cardinal at just 18, you see him chafe in his red robes, his eyes restless, his hands itching for weapons rather than rosaries. He speaks like a soldier trapped in a scholar's body, and whispers ripple that he will one day shed the cassock for armour. When he rides through Rome, dressed in crimson, courtiers murmur that his presence feels more like that of a prince than a priest. You sense his ambition boiling just beneath the surface, ready to explode. Juan, in contrast, plays the role of the pampered favourite. Alexander adores him, grants him the title of Duke of Gandia, and makes him Captain General of the papal armies. You see him strutting through the Vatican like a peacock, dripping in silks, jewels on his fingers, a plumed hat perched at a jaunty angle. Soldiers march behind him, but their loyalty feels more to the papal gold than to Juan himself. He is handsome, yes, but you notice the arrogance in his posture, the indulgence in his gaze. His confidence is not earned, but inherited. Rome mutters that his position is owed to favoritism, not merit. Then there is Lucrezia, the most enigmatic of them all. At first she appears delicate, graceful, almost angelic. You watch her as a teenager, pale hair braided in golden coils, eyes lowered modestly as she attends Mass. But the moment she lifts her gaze, you see something sharper, an intelligence beyond her years, a quiet awareness of her role in her father's world. She is not free to choose her destiny. She is a chess piece moved from board to board. Her marriage is arranged not for love but for strategy, yet somehow she adapts, each time learning to smile, to charm, to survive. The youngest, Geoffrey, is more pawn than player. Barely a teenager, he is married off to Sancha of Aragon, a princess of Naples. You picture the boy, still awkward and unshaven, suddenly bound to a political marriage with a strong-willed woman years his senior. His role is not to shine, but to serve as a link in the chain of alliances Alexander forges. In this family, even childhood is sacrificed to ambition. You watch how the Pope dotes on his children, not only in private, but in public. At banquets, he seats them beside him as though they are princes of Christendom. At audiences, he openly acknowledges them, shocking diplomats who expect discretion. He grants them estates, titles, honors. Rome watchers, scandalized yet fascinated. The irony is biting. The Pope, sworn to celibacy, becomes the most indulgent of fathers, turning the Vatican into a dynastic household. Lucrezia's marriages are perhaps the clearest sign of this dynastic strategy. First, she is married to Giovanni Sforza of Pesaro, binding the papacy to the powerful Milanese family. At the wedding, you watch her glide down the aisle in a gown of white silk, jewels glittering in her hair, while courtiers whisper about the political bargain being sealed. Alexander beams like a proud patriarch, not a pope, as he blesses the union. But when the alliance sours, he annuls the marriage, claiming Giovanni was impotent. A humiliation so sharp that the city roars with laughter. It is clear Lucrezia's fate is not her own. Cesare's story too is shaped by ambition. Though forced into the cardinalate, he schemes constantly for a military career. You see him negotiating with mercenaries, forging bonds with captains, and studying maps with more fervor than scriptures. When his brother Juan's incompetence begins to show, Cesare's envy grows. Rome gossips that he resents Juan's military honors, believing himself far more capable, and indeed his sharp mind and ruthless instincts suggest he may be right. You can almost hear the tension crackling at papal dinners, where Juan boasts and Cesare seethes behind his smile. Juan's arrogance proves his downfall. His lavish spending, his careless insults, and his military failures earn him enemies. You hear soldiers mutter their contempt, courtiers roll their eyes at his boasts, rivals sharpen their daggers. When his body is later found floating in the Tiber, stabbed and discarded, rumors swirl instantly. Was it an enemy noble, a betrayed lover, or perhaps even Cesare himself, removing a rival brother with cold efficiency? Rome whispers that the truth will never be known, but everyone suspects the family's own hand. Through it all, Alexander continues to maneuver, as if the tragedies only sharpen his resolve. He treats his children not as fragile lives, but as instruments of policy. You see him consoling Lucrezia with one hand while drafting marriage contracts with the other. You see him praising Cesare's cunning even as rumors swirl of fratricide. To him, family is both love and strategy, inseparable, indivisible. The people of Rome cannot look away. Pamphlets and poems mock the Borgias endlessly. Lucrezia as the Pope's puppet, Juan as the spoiled fool, Cesare as the ruthless wolf. Some even invent darker rumors: incest, poisonings, secret orgies. Truth blurs with slander until history itself seems drunk. You listen to a street singer belting out a ballad about Lucrezia's beauty and Cesare's knives, and the crowd roars with approval. The children of the Pope have become legends in their own lifetimes, symbols of corruption and fascination. And yet, you sense the cost. Behind Lucrezia's smiles, grief and fear linger. Behind Cesare's swagger, paranoia festers. Behind one's arrogance, vulnerability led him to an early grave. The Pope's children shine brightly, but their brilliance is forged in fire. They are not free, but trapped in a web their father spins endlessly, tightening with each alliance and betrayal. You walk through Rome at dusk, hearing once again the chatter of the crowd. The Borgias, they mutter, are not a family but a storm, and standing amid the glow of torchlight, you feel it too. The Pope's children are pawns and princes, sacrifices and symbols, and as you leave the square, their images linger in your mind. Cesare's sharp gaze, Juan's careless smile, Lucrezia's delicate poise. They are not just the children of a pope. They are the children of Rome's scandal, forever entangled in the legend of the most perverted pontiff in history. If Rome had ever doubted the depths to which Alexander VI's papal court could sink, the infamous Banquet of Chestnuts erased all doubt. You hear of it first in whispers, a rumour carried by servants, murmured by courtiers, hinted at by ambassadors who blush even as they record the details. And yet, as you piece together the fragments, a chilling picture emerges. An event so shameless, so decadent, that it becomes legend. Whether every detail is fact or exaggeration hardly matters. The night itself stands as a symbol of the Vatican transformed into a house of revelry. Cesare Borgia presides over the revels. You see him moving through the crowd with the confidence of a commander, his scarlet cardinal's robes abandoned in favour of princely attire. He raises his goblet, his smile sharp, and the guests cheer. Though still nominally a churchman, tonight he is anything but. Rome's most notorious heir orchestrates not prayer but pleasure. The women arrive, courtesans of Rome, dressed in silks that barely cling to their bodies, jewels winking at their throats. They move like dancers through the hall, laughter rippling as they take their places among cardinals and nobles. Some are veiled, some unveiled, but all are chosen for their beauty. You cannot ignore the irony in the palace of the Pope. Women of the night are treated as queens of the feast. Then comes the centerpiece, the chestnuts. Servants pour baskets of them onto the floor, scattering them across the polished marble. The courtesans are instructed to crawl on hands and knees, gathering the chestnuts by candlelight. Their bodies gleam in the flickering glow, and the spectacle is both farcical and obscene. Guests applaud, cheer and toss coins, as if the Vatican has become a carnival. You watch with disbelief, knowing that this is not the invention of enemies, but an event chronicled even by those within the papal orbit. As the evening descends further into scandal, the courtesans are paired with the guests in contests of endurance and indulgence. Prizes of fine garments and jewels are awarded not for piety or virtue, but for lust. Musicians play faster, laughter grows louder, and the line between ceremony and debauchery vanishes. You feel the weight of the setting, the frescoed walls, the papal ceilings, the holy chambers turned into a brothel by the very family meant to embody Christendom. The Pope himself? Accounts differ. Some claim Alexander watched from a balcony, smiling faintly, pleased by the vigour of his children and courtiers. Others insist he participated only by providing the setting, withdrawing before the worst excesses. But the very fact that such a feast could happen within Vatican walls speaks volumes. Silence in this case was as loud as complicity. Ambassadors take careful notes, though they struggle to describe what they see without blushing. The German envoy writes of a shameless display unworthy of pagans. The Venetian describes it as a night of Saturnalian madness. Even Rome, accustomed to scandal, is stunned. The taverns buzz with songs mocking the chestnuts, and the satire spreads across Europe. The papacy, once cloaked in awe, is dragged laughing into the gutter. What shocks you most is not just the indulgence, but the organisation. This is not chaos. It is orchestrated. Cesare's command, the servants' timing, the structured contests. Everything suggests deliberate planning. The Borgias are not ashamed of revelry. They are staging it, turning even vice into theatre. It is as though they seek to prove that no limit binds them, no law restrains them, not even within the Vatican itself. You watch the faces of the courtiers. Some are flushed with wine and lust, cheering wildly. Others smile nervously, caught between horror and fascination. A few slip away quietly, unwilling to witness more, but none dare challenge openly. To object would mean opposing Cesare, Alexander, and the entire Borgia machine. Better to laugh, drink, and pretend it is all just another Roman feast. The courtesans, meanwhile, play their roles with practiced ease. They laugh, crawl, dance, and embrace, turning scandal into performance. You wonder what they think, whether they feel shame, or whether they too revel in the power of turning the Vatican into their stage. Perhaps they understand better than anyone the truth of the Borgias, that appearances are everything, and scandal itself is a kind of power. When dawn finally breaks, the palace is littered with empty goblets, wilted garlands, and exhausted revelers. The chestnuts are crushed underfoot, the marble floor sticky with wine. Musicians snore in corners, courtesans gather their gowns, and servants sweep with weary eyes. The Vatican, for a few hours at least, has been transformed into something resembling the courts of decadent emperors. You step outside into the pale Roman morning, the bells of St. Peter's tolling ironically above. The Banquet of Chestnuts quickly becomes legend. Some claim it is exaggerated, others that enemies of the Borgias embellished details, but the chronicles are too numerous, the witnesses too varied, for it to be dismissed entirely. Whether every chestnut was truly scattered, every contest truly played, the essence remains. Under Alexander VI, the papacy embraced a decadence so bold that rumour and reality blurred into one. For the people of Rome, it becomes a story to tell for generations. In taverns, men laugh about crawling women. In pulpits, priests thunder against depravity. In courts across Europe, ambassadors recount the scandal with a mix of disgust and amusement. The papacy itself is mocked as never before, its sanctity undermined by chestnuts rolling across marble floors. You reflect on the symbolism. Chestnuts, humble food for peasants, transformed into toys for courtesans in the Pope's palace. It is a perfect image of Alexander's reign. Sacred things made profane, ordinary things turned obscene, the line between worship and indulgence erased. You realize that this banquet is not just an episode of scandal, but a mirror of the entire Borgia papacy. And as you leave Rome's streets that morning, the laughter of taverns behind you, the image will not leave your mind. Women crawling across the Vatican floor for chestnuts, cardinals clapping like schoolboys, and the shadow of Alexander VI looming over it all. A pope whose reign is remembered not for prayers or reforms, but for nights like this, nights that turn the Church of Christ into the court of Bacchus. When the wine stains of the Banquet of Chestnuts have barely dried, you notice another stain spreading through Rome, less visible, but far more corrosive. It is the corruption of the Church itself under Alexander VI. You walk through the Vatican's corridors and see it everywhere. Offices exchanged for gold, indulgences hawked like spices in the market, and papal justice bent according to the weight of a bribe. The Vatican no longer even pretends to be holy. It is a bank, a theatre, and a casino, all under the Pope's tiara. Start with indulgences. In theory, they are meant as acts of mercy, pardons granted to the faithful who repent, pray, or perform pilgrimages. Under Alexander, however, they are little more than receipts. You watch friars stand in marketplaces, shouting promises of salvation for coins. Pilgrims hand over copper pieces and receive certificates guaranteeing shortened time in purgatory. The poor scrape their last coins together, believing their dead kin will rise sooner into heaven. Meanwhile, the money flows straight into the papal coffers to pay for villas, jewels, and festivals. You feel a knot in your stomach as you watch faith bartered like bread. Simone, the selling of church offices, spreads like wildfire. You overhear negotiations in candlelit rooms. A wealthy noble buys a bishopric for his son. A merchant secures an abbey in exchange for a hefty payment. Cardinal hats are distributed not for virtue or scholarship, but for bribes. You see coins passed beneath tables, documents signed with grins, and men walk away not holier, but richer. The very air of Rome feels thick with transaction, every sacrament reduced to a price tag. One afternoon, You stumble upon a procession of newly appointed bishops. They march in glittering robes, their mitres high, their staffs polished. To the crowds they look like saints, but you know the truth. These are not shepherds chosen by God, but buyers chosen by gold. Each step they take is a clink of coins, echoing in your memory. Rome laughs quietly, for everyone knows it, but no one can stop it, not while Alexander reigns. Even justice bends to corruption. In papal courts, cases are decided less by evidence than by bribes. You watch a nobleman, accused of violence, walk free after handing a jeweled cup to a papal judge. Another, guilty of embezzling church funds, avoids punishment by granting land to the Pope's son. The scales of justice are not balanced. They are weighted with gold. You realize that under Alexander, crime is not sin. It is simply a fee unpaid. Meanwhile, the Pope himself grows wealthier by the day. He taxes everything: trade routes, monasteries, even pilgrimages. Rome, a city already accustomed to papal greed, groans under the weight. Merchants grumble as tariffs rise, peasants curse as alms are drained, and even nobles whisper of extortion. Yet Alexander spends it all with gusto. You walk into his treasuries and see coffers overflowing with silver, only to be emptied again for tournaments, dowries and bribes. The church, meant to guard souls, has become the world's most extravagant piggy bank. What makes it worse is the brazenness. Other popes, however corrupt, cloak their actions in layers of ritual. Alexander does not bother. He demands payments openly, sells offices without apology, and rewards supporters blatantly. His audacity shields him, for scandal is harder to attack when it is flaunted rather than hidden. You can almost admire the efficiency, even as it chills you. The ordinary faithful suffer most. You walk through Roman streets and see pilgrims who travelled hundreds of miles, clutching indulgence papers they barely understand. Old women sell heirlooms to buy pardons for their sons. Poor men grumble that salvation costs more than bread. The disillusionment grows, even if it does not yet boil into rebellion. You hear mutters in taverns that Christ drove merchants from the temple, but now the temple itself is the marketplace. Ambassadors record their horror. The German envoys especially bristle at the commercialization of faith. One mutters to you that if this continues, it will tear Christendom apart. You laugh nervously at the exaggeration, not knowing yet that within a few decades Martin Luther will indeed rise in fury against indulgences. For now, though, the world merely watches, shaking its head at Rome's shamelessness. Simony infects even the Pope's own family strategy. Cesare, already a cardinal, is gifted rich benefices that flood him with revenue, despite his total lack of piety. Geoffrey, married into Naples, receives abbeys as pocket money. Lucrezia's dowries are paid with indulgence money squeezed from pilgrims. The church's spiritual wealth is drained not for crusades or hospitals, but for the advancement of the Borgia dynasty. You wonder whether even Alexander himself notices the irony, or whether he relishes it. You attend a meeting where bribes are openly discussed. A man from Florence argues for a papal favour, offering gold in exchange. Another counters with promises of land. The Pope nods gravely, pretending to deliberate, but his eyes gleam as if reading ledgers rather than hearts. At last the highest bidder wins, and the decision is sealed with a handshake. You step outside, stunned by how ordinary it feels, as if holiness itself were nothing more than a commodity. The people adapt with bitter humour. Jesters in Rome perform skits about buying heaven wholesale. Caricatures depict St. Peter's keys dangling from a money bag. Some priests, ashamed, try to offer true guidance to their flocks, but they are drowned out by the roar of papal commerce. Cynicism replaces faith, laughter replaces reverence, and still the coins flow, chest by chest, into the papal palace. Even foreign rulers exploit the corruption. Kings flatter Alexander with gifts, knowing he will trade favours freely. France seeks dispensations, Spain requests marriages, Venice bargains for indulgences. The Pope obliges, each decision greased with gold or advantage. Papal authority, once unchallengeable, becomes negotiable. You realize that Alexander's reign cheapens not only Rome but the very idea of the papacy across Europe. Inside the Vatican, courtiers thrive on the spoils. Secretaries grow rich, selling access, clerks earn fortunes drafting indulgence papers, and even guards pocket bribes for favors. It is as if the entire palace has become a market stall. You overhear one cynical servant mutter, "We sell heaven by the pound." No one argues, they only laugh, and yet, amid the cynicism, Alexander himself flourishes. His court glows with gold, his children rise, his enemies are bought off. He sees no contradiction. To him, wealth is power, and power is papal authority. He believes himself untouchable, as if no amount of corruption can undo his reign, and in truth, for now, he is right. Still, you sense the undercurrent of danger. Corruption breeds resentment, resentment breeds enemies, and enemies breed conspiracies. You overhear nobles plotting, cardinals fuming, preachers shouting in the streets. For every chest of silver Alexander collects, another heart hardens against him. Rome is dazzled, but it is also simmering. One evening, you walk past St. Peter's and see pilgrims lighting candles, their faces weary. They kneel, pray, and clutch indulgence papers, hoping their coins have truly bought them grace. You feel the irony sting. Their faith is pure, but the system that exploits it is rotten. They believe in heaven, but Rome believes in profit, and in that gulf lies the tragedy of Alexander VI's papacy. As you leave the square, you realize that corruption under Alexander is not a side note. It is the very essence of his rule. The church is no longer a sanctuary but a marketplace, no longer a shepherd but a broker, and though Rome laughs, sings, and shrugs, you feel the shadow of a storm gathering. This is corruption so vast that history itself will recoil. If gold and indulgences are Alexander VI's daylight tools, then poison and daggers are his shadows. Walk Rome's streets after nightfall, and you hear the same whispers over and over. Beware the Borgias. They are said to kill with daggers in alleys, chalices at banquets, rings that leak venom into wine. Whether every tale is true matters less than the fear it spreads. In this Rome, reputation itself is a weapon, and the Borgias wield it with terrifying skill. The story of one Borgia's death becomes the city's obsession. One night in 1497, the Pope's beloved son vanishes after supper. He is last seen riding through the streets with a small escort. Cheerful, oblivious. Days later, his body is fished out of the Tiber, stabbed multiple times, stripped of jewels, tossed aside like refuse. Rome reels. You hear people mutter that one, arrogant and careless, had earned many enemies, but the silence of the papal court, the lack of genuine investigation, the speed with which the matter is hushed, these breed suspicion. Was it rival nobles? Was it Cesare, seething with envy? Or was it the father himself, sacrificing a pawn gone astray? The uncertainty is worse than an answer, for it feeds the legend of Borgia poison. You attend the funeral and see Alexander's grief. He weeps publicly, tearing his robes, mourning like any father. Yet days later, he resumes feasts, arranges new appointments, and laughs once again at court. Rome notes the speed of his recovery. Grief, perhaps, but also calculation. The death of one clears the path for Cesare to abandon the cardinalate and seize the role he truly craves. Soldier and prince. A tragedy, yes, but also an opportunity. The rumors of poison swirl wider still. You hear tales of dinners where rivals sip wine and collapse, of rings with hidden needles, of powders sprinkled onto meat. Sometimes these stories contradict each other, sometimes they are impossible, but truth is irrelevant. Fear itself keeps enemies at bay. When Caesar approaches, nobles lower their eyes, uncertain whether the smile on his lips conceals a dagger in his hand. Lucrezia, too, is woven into these tales. Gossip insists she carries a ring with a tiny compartment for poison, that she smiles sweetly while slipping venom into goblets. Is it true? Perhaps not. Yet the stories spread like wildfire, and soon she is branded not just as pawn, but as enchantress. A Borgia daughter cloaked in lethal charm. You walk past taverns where men sing mocking ballads about her beauty and her deadly cup, and you realize that even innocence cannot shield her from legend. Cesare embraces the role most fully. After shedding his cardinal's robes, he plunges into Italy's wars with ruthless precision. You follow him as he rides with mercenaries, his banner blazing with the bull of the Borgias. Cities fall, lords tremble, and enemies vanish mysteriously. When a rival condottiere suddenly dies at supper, Rome nods knowingly. Borgia poison. When a duke disappears without trace, the whisper repeats, Borgia dagger. Cesare does not deny it. He lets the fear grow, using reputation as much as steel. The Pope himself is not above suspicion. You overhear ambassadors joke grimly that dining at the Vatican is riskier than dining with highwaymen. Enemies who dine with Alexander often fall ill soon after. Some recover, some do not. Whether by chance, by poison, or by whispered arrangement, none can say. But the effect is the same. Ear cloaks the papacy and fear is power. Consider the case of Alfonso of Aragon, Lucrezia's second husband. After alliances shift, he becomes inconvenient. One night, assassins attack him near St. Peter's. Though wounded, he survives. Yet weeks later, while recovering, he is strangled in his bed. All fingers point to Saz. You hear Lucrezia's sobs echo through the palace, but you also see her father and brother continuing their business as though nothing has happened. The message is clear. Sentiment is secondary to strategy, and survival trumps love. The Orsini family, ancient rivals of the Borgias, feel this violence most keenly. You watch Cesare lure them with promises, then crush them with betrayal. Some die in battles orchestrated by papal armies, others vanish mysteriously. Their lands are seized, their power broken. Rome whispers of poisonings at Orsini feasts, of daggers in the night. Whether true or not, the Orsini themselves believe it, and that belief destroys them. Even foreign courts are not immune to the fear. In France, in Spain, in Venice, ambassadors joke nervously about carrying antidotes when visiting Rome. Some carry testers to sip their wine before they dare touch it. You see one Venetian envoy sniff his bread suspiciously, refusing to eat until others do first. Such is the power of reputation. Even in the absence of poison, fear itself becomes a poison that corrodes trust. Inside the Vatican, the whispers are endless. Servants mutter about locked chambers where powders are stored, about cooks who vanish after preparing fatal meals. Cardinals glance nervously at their cups during banquets. Yet none dare confront Alexander or Cesare directly. To accuse them would be to sign your own death warrant. For whether or not the poison exists, the daggers certainly do. What fascinates you most is how the Borgias turn crime into theatre. They do not hide the rumours, they cultivate them. Cesare strides into court with a smile that hints at menace. Alexander chuckles at satirical poems rather than condemning them, and Lucrezia maintains her sweet facade while whispers swirl around her. By leaning into the legend, they ensure that no one dares to test its truth. Rome, meanwhile, gorges on the gossip. Street vendors sell pamphlets of lurid tales, the poisoned rings, the silken cords, the vanished rivals. Plays parody the Borgias as devils in papal robes. Audiences roaring with laughter and fear. The line between fact and fiction disappears, but the effect remains. The Borgias become synonymous with murder, their name a shorthand for treachery. One night, you walk past the Tiber, where Juan's body was once found. The moon glimmers on the water, and you hear a boatman mutter, "The river still carries Borgia secrets." You shiver, not because you know every story is true, but because you know every Roman believes it could be true, and that belief is enough. Violence for the Borgias is not just elimination, it is message. Each death warns others, obey or suffer. Each poisoning whispers to rivals, resist and you will choke. Even when they do nothing, their reputation works for them, paralyzing enemies with dread. In an Italy torn by factions, that dread becomes a weapon sharper than any sword. And so you leave the Vatican that night, with the stench of rumour thick in your nose, whether by dagger or by poison, whether by fact or by fable. The Borgias have carved their reputation in blood. Rome trembles, Europe whispers, and you cannot shake the feeling that you too might choke on the wine if you linger too long in their company. Walk the streets of Italy outside Rome, and you feel the rumble of discontent. For every noble dazzled by Alexander's banquets, there are priests, reformers, and common folk seething with outrage. In Florence, Ferrara, Venice, and beyond, voices rise against the papacy, calling it not the house of God, but the house of Borgia. You pause in marketplaces and hear their words, sometimes shouted from pulpits, sometimes whispered in alleys. The Pope is corrupt, the Vatican a brothel, and Christendom itself endangered by Rome's excess. The fiercest voice belongs to Girolamo Savonarola, the Dominican friar of Florence. You travel north and find him in the pulpit of San Marco, his thin frame wrapped in black robes, his eyes blazing with apocalyptic fire. His voice cracks the air like a whip. Rome is the harlot of Babylon. The church is drowned in sin. A pope who sells his soul for gold is no shepherd but a wolf. The congregation trembles, some weeping, others cheering. His words sear like lightning through the Renaissance city, and you know Alexander himself cannot ignore them. Savonarola's sermons grow more radical each week. He denounces not only the papal corruption but the vanities of Florence itself. Its jewels, its paintings, its carnival masks. He preaches that God's wrath will descend if the city does not repent. You witness the famous bonfire of the vanities, when citizens toss cosmetics, art, and even musical instruments into flames, urged on by his disciples. It is a startling reversal of Rome's extravagance. While Alexander crowns mistresses with jewels, Florence burns its finery in the square. Alexander VI despises Savonarola, for the friar's words reach ears across Europe. Envoys report his sermons to their courts, spreading the image of a pope denounced as Antichrist by one of Italy's most famous preachers. The pope issues orders demanding his silence, threatening excommunication, but Savonarola refuses to yield. You hear him thunder, "If Rome strikes me down, it proves my words. Better to burn for truth than live in corruption." His defiance electrifies Florence and embarrasses the Vatican. Yet even prophets make enemies. The Florentine elite, once empowered by his Puritanism, begin to tire of his severity. Artists bristle at his condemnation of beauty. Merchants resent his rejection of profit. When famine strikes and his promises of divine favor falter, his support crumbles. You are there the day he is dragged to the gallows in 1498, hanged and burned in the very square where his followers once sang hymns. His ashes scatter into the Arno, but his words remain. Rome may have silenced him, but Europe remembers the friar who called the Pope a devil. He is not alone. In Venice, preachers rail against papal taxes draining their coffers. In Germany, murmurs of dissatisfaction grow louder each year as indulgent sellers roam villages like hawkers of cheap wares. In Spain, Queen Isabella herself fumes at Alexander's scandals, complaining that the Vicar of Christ shames Christendom. You listen to couriers and ambassadors carry these complaints back to Rome, and you sense the Pope's irritation. He laughs them off at banquets, but behind closed doors, his fury boils. Conspiracies fester too. You hear of cardinals secretly plotting to curb the Pope's excesses, whispering in cloisters about councils that might depose him. Families like the Orsini and Colonna, humiliated and displaced by Borgia ambition, nurse grudges and seek revenge. Letters smuggled through Rome speak of poison plots, not against the Pope's enemies this time, but against the Pope himself. It is a strange symmetry. The master of poison lives in fear of poison. One evening in a Roman tavern, you overhear two men discussing Caesar's enemies. They fear him more than the devil, one says, but fear breeds courage. Sooner or later, someone will strike. The other replies grimly, "Strike at Cesare, and you strike at the Pope himself. You best dig your own grave first." The laughter that follows is nervous, not merry. Even Rome's jesters sense the tension. In France, King Charles VIII marches into Italy in 1494. His army a storm of lances and artillery. Alexander scrambles to balance diplomacy, first resisting, then placating, then allying when convenient. To critics, it is proof of his weakness. A pope willing to sell Christendom's unity for survival. You watch as French troops swagger through Rome, their banners waving beside St. Peter's. The sight shakes even hardened Romans. Foreign soldiers camped in the Holy City, tolerated by a pope more concerned with his family than with faith. Yet somehow Alexander survives each crisis. He bribes, bargains, cajoles and intimidates, outmaneuvering both kings and conspirators. Enemies rage, but they cannot topple him. You realize that his corruption, while scandalous, also makes him adaptable. Unlike rigid reformers, he bends like a reed in storms, always finding a way to profit, always keeping the papal throne intact. It is both his genius and his damnation. But the discontent grows louder still. Pamphlets circulate in Rome comparing him to Nero, mocking him as the bull of the apocalypse. Satirical drawings depict the Pope with horns, embracing courtesans while angels weep. Even within the Vatican, younger clerics murmur prayers for deliverance from their own pontiff. The papacy, once feared as unassailable, becomes the butt of jokes and the subject of conspiracies. You feel the ground tremble, not with literal earthquakes, but with the shifting of faith itself. You stand one morning in a Florentine square where a preacher quotes Isaiah. Your rulers are rebels, companions of thieves. They all love bribes and chase after gifts. The crowd nods knowingly, murmuring, "Rome, Rome." It is a chilling moment. Scripture itself has become a weapon aimed at the Vatican. You realize that Alexander's enemies wield not just daggers and poison, but words sharper than steel. Back in Rome, Alexander hears of these rumblings. He rages against critics, but he also laughs. To his courtiers, he boasts that enemies only prove his strength, that envy is the price of greatness. Cesare echoes him, sneering that fear itself is their best armor. Yet behind their bravado, you see the shadows lengthen. Even the most powerful men cannot silence every voice forever. What is striking is how much Alexander seems to relish the hatred. He thrives on it, wearing infamy like a crown. When preachers call him Antichrist, he shrugs and holds another feast. When pamphlets mock him, he chuckles and orders another round of bribes. It is as if he believes that so long as he reigns, the fury of his enemies is proof of his success. And yet, you feel the irony pressing down. For all his cunning, Alexander VI is shaping the very opposition that will one day explode into open revolt across Europe. Each indulgence sold, each mistress flaunted, each bribe exchanged, becomes fuel for reformers waiting in the wings. The Borgias may laugh tonight, but history will not laugh with them. As you leave Florence and return to Rome, you carry with you the echo of Savonarola's fire, the whispers of nobles, the mutters of peasants. They form a chorus of opposition, scattered yet insistent. The Pope may still feast and smile, but beyond the Vatican walls, enemies gather, their voices growing stronger with each scandal. And you cannot shake the feeling that Alexander, for all his power, is building the stage, not just for his family's triumph, but for their downfall. In Rome, politics is rarely written in ink alone. You soon realize that under Alexander VI, treaties are not sealed only with pens and seals, but with bodies and beds. Seduction itself becomes a tool of diplomacy, wielded as deftly as armies or bribes. You wander through candlelit halls and overhear whispers, marriages arranged like trade agreements, mistresses offered as bridges between factions, pleasures granted in exchange for loyalty. The papacy, meant to be the seat of spiritual chastity, becomes the most elaborate matchmaking bureau in Europe. Lucrezia Borgia stands at the heart of this strategy. You watch her childhood dissolve quickly into a series of political marriages, each designed to cement alliances. Her first, Giovanni Sforza of Pesaro, bound the papacy to Milan's power. Yet when the alliance no longer suited Alexander, the marriage was annulled with humiliating accusations of impotence. Rome laughed cruelly at Giovanni's disgrace, while Alexander prepared Lucrezia for her next role. She is a daughter, yes, but also a bargaining chip. Each time her father needs an alliance, she is moved like a chess piece across Italy's board. The second match, to Alfonso of Aragon, ties the Borgias to Naples. For a time you see genuine affection blossom between Lucrezia and her young husband. They stroll through gardens, attend feasts arm in arm, and even hold hands in public scandalous intimacy for political marriages of the era. Yet politics is a harsher master than love. When Cesare turns against Naples to ally with France, Alfonso becomes expendable. His eventual murder, stabbed, then strangled in bed, shatters Lucrezia's fragile happiness. You witness her grief, but also her resignation. She has learned the cruel lesson. In the Vatican, affection bends before ambition. Nor is Lucrezia alone in this theatre of seduction. Cesare himself uses charm as ruthlessly as steel. You watch him at French courts, his dark eyes captivating noble women, his charisma winning favours as effectively as his troops. He woos King Louis XII's sister-in-law Charlotte d'Albret, securing marriage and French support for his campaigns. The match gives him not only prestige but also legitimacy in European eyes. Cesare, once a cardinal in scarlet robes, reinvents himself as both soldier and seducer, conquering hearts and lands alike. Alexander VI encourages this strategy. To him, the allure of his children is not private, but political. He parades Lucrezia's beauty, praises Cesare's charm, and ensures that every whisper of romance is also a whisper of power. Courtiers chuckle that the Borgias negotiate with both dowries and kisses. Ambassadors take careful notes, reporting back that in Rome one must consider not only armies and treaties, but bedsheets and banquets. Mistresses too play their roles in this game. Giulia Farnese's relationship with Alexander elevates her brother Alessandro to the cardinalate, launching the rise of the Farnese dynasty. You watch Giulia attend papal audiences, her presence itself a signal of alliance. Courtiers bow to her not only for beauty, but because they know her favour means access to papal power. Seduction here is currency, traded as openly as gold. You overhear one Venetian envoy joke bitterly that in Rome, to negotiate with the Pope, one must first negotiate with his women. The remark, though cynical, captures the truth. Families eager for influence push their daughters toward papal attention. Noble women whisper favours into ambassadors' ears. Even courtesans know their value, moving from banquet to banquet, their laughter carrying hidden messages of allegiance. The manipulation is not always overt. Sometimes it is simply the rumour of seduction that shapes politics. Rome buzzes with tales. Lucrezia sleeping with Cesare, Lucrezia with her father, Alexander with countless women. Whether true or false, the gossip itself alters alliances. Families hesitate to cross the Borgias, fearing scandal. Others angle to attach themselves, hoping rumour will bind them closer to power. In this way, truth becomes less important than perception, and perception becomes a weapon. You attend a feast where the strategy unfolds before your eyes. Lucrezia sits beside a visiting envoy, smiling sweetly, her laughter disarming his suspicion. Cesare moves through the hall, clasping hands with nobles, whispering promises. Alexander watches it all with satisfaction, as if conducting a symphony where each gesture of charm is another note in his political song. The envoy departs days later, more pliant than before, and Rome nods knowingly. Seduction has won another treaty. Not everyone admires this diplomacy. Preachers thunder that Rome has become Babylon, that the Pope treats his children as courtesans of state. Pamphlets mock Lucrezia as the bride of Italy, wedded not to one man but to whichever alliance her father requires. Cesare is painted as a libertine, conquering women as carelessly as towns. Yet mockery does not weaken the Borgias, it amplifies them. Each scandal, each rumour, reinforces the sense that they are irresistible, unstoppable, woven into every corner of Italian politics. Foreign courts grumble, but comply. Spain frowns at Alexander's shamelessness, yet seeks his approval for marriages. France, scandalized yet pragmatic, allies with Cesare for military campaigns. Even Ferrara, initially hesitant, eventually bows to the prospect of Lucrezia's dowry and papal favor. In Italy, reputation matters as much as virtue, and the Borgia's reputation, however sordid, is one of undeniable power. You notice how this strategy seeps into the daily rhythm of Rome. Courtiers flatter not only the Pope, but also his mistresses. Ambassadors send gifts not only to cardinals, but to Lucrezia. Even rival families adapt. marrying daughters and nieces into papal networks despite their disgust. It is as if seduction has become another language of diplomacy, spoken fluently by the Borgias and grudgingly by their enemies. You pause one evening outside the Vatican and listen to a crowd gossip. The Pope sells heaven, one man mutters, and his children sell themselves. Another replies, at least they do it well. Better a Borgia who shows his sin than a hypocrite who hides it. The crowd laughs, then falls silent as papal guards pass. The ambivalence is striking. Scandal disgusts them, but spectacle entertains them. The Borgias thrive on that tension. It becomes clear to you that Alexander VI has redefined diplomacy itself. Where others sign treaties, he arranges marriages. Where others send armies, he sends children. Where others hide affairs, he flaunts them. In this inversion of morality, he crafts a system that works precisely because it shocks. Seduction, once private, becomes a public act of governance. And as you walk away from yet another wedding procession, fireworks bursting overhead, you cannot help but feel the weight of it all. The music, the jewels, the smiles, they are not celebrations of love, but of strategy. Each vow spoken at the altar is another chain binding Italy to papal ambition. Each kiss is another signature on a treaty of flesh. You realize, with a chill, that in Alexander's Rome, there is no line between bed and throne. They are one and the same. When you wander the streets of Rome under Alexander VI, you realize that the true pulse of the papacy is not in the gilded Vatican halls, but in the chatter of taverns, the songs of street performers, and the graffiti scrawled on stone walls. Rome is a city of sharp tongues. Its people have survived emperors, tyrants, and countless popes. They know how to laugh at power even while bowing to it. And under the Borgias, satire becomes the city's favorite pastime. Walk through the Campo de' Fiori at night, and you hear ballad singers strumming lutes, their voices carrying scandalous verses. One sings about Lucrezia, painting her as the bride of Italy, married not once but endlessly, her dowries buying treaties rather than love. The crowd erupts in laughter, tossing coins into his hat. Another lampoons Cesare, calling him the butcher cardinal turned prince, a man who swaps his cassock for armor and his psalter for poison. The audience cheers, half horrified, half delighted. Rome thrives on mocking its rulers, and the Borgias provide endless material. Graffiti scrawled on Vatican walls adds to the chorus. You pause to read crude sketches, the papal tiara drawn as a wine goblet, Alexander's face kissing courtesans, Lucrezia pictured with a serpent coiled around her arm. The city's wit is merciless. Even the Pope's name becomes a pun. Borgia twisted into orgia. The joke is vulgar, but the sentiment is sharp. Inside taverns, the jokes grow darker. Men sip cheap wine and mutter that salvation is sold at market stalls, that heaven costs more than bread. One says, the Pope sells indulgences, but perhaps he should sell tickets to his banquets, at least then we would see what our money buys. Laughter ripples through the smoky air. Another jokes that confession has become redundant. Why confess when the Pope himself sins more in a day than we in a year? The room roars with laughter, though some cross themselves nervously after the words. Not everyone laughs. You hear the anger in the voices of pilgrims who arrive from distant lands, expecting holiness, but finding Rome dripping in vice. They kneel at St. Peter's, clutching indulgence papers, while locals snicker behind their backs. Some weep, feeling betrayed, their faith wounded by the corruption so plain around them. Their mutters add to the growing tide of resentment that spreads beyond Rome's walls. Ambassadors, too, carry the gossip back to their courts. Reports sent to Spain, France, and Germany are filled with details of feasts, mistresses, and murders. Yet beneath their disapproval lies a strange fascination. You imagine kings reading these reports and shaking their heads in disgust, yet secretly amused, even entertained by the spectacle. The papacy, once the austere guardian of souls, has become the most scandalous stage in Europe. But for Romans themselves, the reaction is more complex. On one hand, they grumble about rising taxes, sold offices, and the arrogance of the Borgia children parading through the city. On the other, they are captivated by the sheer audacity of their pope. Rome has always admired boldness, even in sin. Better, some argue, to have a pope who rules like a Caesar than one who hides like a monk. Cynicism breeds acceptance. You pause by a fountain where old men gossip under the evening sun. One shrugs and says, "Every pope sins, but at least Alexander sins honestly." Another replies, "His honesty is our disgrace." The group chuckles, then sighs. Their laughter is weary, their resignation heavy. They cannot stop the corruption, but they can mock it, and mocking becomes its own form of survival. Festivals in Rome reflect this duality. Official processions are grand, with Alexander parading in golden robes, his children at his side, incense filling the air, yet in the streets, masquerades parody the same events. Revelers wear masks of the Pope and his mistresses, mocking their excess with bawdy humour. Crowds roar with laughter, not out of disrespect for faith itself, but as a way to reclaim dignity from the spectacle forced upon them. You hear songs that are less satire than lament. A blind beggar sings of Rome turned into Babylon, of altars stained with greed, of shepherds who devour their flock. His voice cracks, and the crowd grows silent. For all the laughter there is pain too. Romans may jest, but many also mourn the loss of sanctity in the heart of Christendom. Yet, Alexander himself seems immune. Courtiers report that he chuckles at satire, even enjoys it. Perhaps he understands that laughter defangs outrage, that mockery distracts from revolt. By flaunting his sins so openly, he robs his critics of power. Rome may laugh at him, but Rome still obeys. He dines in luxury, while the city composes poems about his vices. He wears their mockery like another jeweled robe. You notice how this dynamic seeps into daily life. Merchants hang painted signs mocking papal taxes, yet still pay them. Courtesans joke about being holier than priests, yet still attend Vatican feasts. Even priests, privately ashamed, repeat the jokes in whispers, as though humour is their only shield against despair. Rome becomes a city where laughter and corruption dance hand in hand. Foreign pilgrims, however, are less forgiving. You overhear a German merchant mutter, "If this is the seat of Peter, then Peter has drowned in wine." His words sting because they are true. Each scandal erodes the authority of the church beyond Italy, where satire is not a safety valve but a spark for rebellion. You sense that while Romans endure with jokes, others may one day rise with fury. The children of the Pope become the favourite targets. Lucrezia is painted as a seductress, Cesare as a murderer, Juan as a fool, Geoffrey as a pawn. Street artists draw caricatures of them as a demonic family, feasting on Rome's wealth. Crowds laugh, but the humour is edged with bitterness. The Borgias are not just mocked, they are feared. The laughter is nervous, not carefree. One evening, you pass a tavern where a troupe performs a play. The actors parody a papal banquet. One plays Alexander, another Julia Farnese, another Cesare. They stuff themselves with bread, drink wine until they stagger, and then collapse as if poisoned. The crowd howls with laughter. Coins rain onto the stage, yet the message is unmistakable. The people see their Pope as a glutton, their Vatican as a theatre of death. Still, for all the satire, Rome does not rebel. Why? Because the city is used to corruption, and because fear tempers anger. The Borgias may be mocked, but they are also dangerous. Better to sing songs than to raise swords. Rome's laughter is both defiance and submission, a way to cope with the unbearable without courting destruction. As you leave the crowded piazza, the sound of lutes and laughter echoing behind you, you realize that public reaction in Rome is a strange alchemy of scorn and fascination. The Borgias are despised yet admired, mocked yet obeyed. The people vent their outrage in satire, but beneath the jokes lies a quiet despair that holiness itself has been swallowed by spectacle, and that all they can do is laugh while the papacy burns. Step outside Rome, and you realize that Alexander VI's scandals do not stop at the Tiber. They ripple outward across Europe, reaching courts from Madrid to Paris, from London to Vienna. Kings and princes who once trembled before the Pope now shake their heads in disbelief. muttering that the Vicar of Christ behaves more like a carnival ringleader. You find yourself travelling between courts, listening to monarchs and ministers weigh how to deal with a pontiff whose power is real, yet whose reputation reeks of sin. In Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella are furious. You hear their ambassadors complain bitterly about indulgence sellers squeezing peasants dry, about papal offices auctioned to the highest bidder. The Catholic monarchs, so devout in public, wince at reports of the Pope's mistresses and children. Isabella in particular, stern and pious, calls Alexander's papacy a scandal upon Christendom. Yet Spain cannot simply denounce him, for they need papal approval to consolidate their conquests, to bless their claim over the New World. You watch the uneasy dance, disgust on one hand, necessity on the other. France views Alexander differently. King Charles VIII, young and ambitious, marches into Italy in 1494 with dreams of claiming Naples. You watch French troops swagger through Florence, Siena, and eventually Rome itself, cannons rumbling like thunder across cobblestones. Alexander trembles but bends quickly, offering alliances, bribes, and flattery. France, at first contemptuous of him, discovers that the Borgia Pope is an aster of survival. Even when mocked as corrupt, he manipulates kings as deftly as he manipulates cardinals. You see the irony. The very sins that make him scandalous also make him flexible. Yet France's kings never forget his reputation. When Louis XII later takes the throne, he strikes bargains with Cesare Borgia, granting him French troops to carve out territories in Romagna. Louis knows he is dealing with a family infamous for poison and treachery, but ambition blinds him. You stand in the French court and hear nobles whisper, "Why ally with wolves?" The answer is simple: because wolves are useful. In England, Henry VII is more cautious. Reports of papal orgies and indulgent sales reach London, provoking quiet scorn. Henry, ever calculating, avoids open criticism, but limits his reliance on Alexander. To English courtiers, Rome under the Borgias is both distant and decadent, a warning sign of a church too entangled in sin. You sense a seed being planted, one that decades later will blossom into Henry VIII's dramatic break with Rome. The German princes respond with sharper disdain. They grumble about indulgences draining their lands, about Rome fattening itself while their peasants starve. In taverns from Cologne to Nuremberg, merchants mutter that salvation has been turned into a scam. You attend one such gathering and hear a burgher say bluntly, "If Rome continues so, the Germans will one day rise against her." His words echo in your ears, prophetic of storms yet to come. Alexander does not hear them, or if he does, he laughs them off. But the resentment festers. The Italian states themselves seethe and maneuver. Venice resents papal taxes on trade. Milan fumes at shifting alliances. Naples curses the Borgias for their betrayals. Everywhere you go, Italian nobles mutter of Alexander as a fox, sly and untrustworthy, yet all bow when summoned, for papal authority still carries weight. The paradox is striking. They despise him, yet cannot ignore him. Hatred does not diminish his power, it sharpens it. Diplomats write endless reports filled with scandal. The Venetian envoy describes the Pope's court as more suited to Bacchus than to Peter. The French envoy snickers about Lucrezia's marriages, mocking them as treaties in disguise. The Spanish ambassador shakes his head at Cesare's ruthlessness, muttering that such a son could only be born of corruption. These reports circulate across Europe, feeding a shared image of Rome as decadent, dangerous, and unholy. Yet kings continue to seek Alexander's blessing. Spain demands bulls, confirming its claims in the Americas. France requests annulments and dispensations. Even the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian seeks papal approval for dynastic marriages. You marvel at the contradiction. The Pope may be mocked, but his signature still moves armies and crowns. Authority, however tarnished, remains authority. Alexander exploits this relentlessly. You watch him receive ambassadors in gilded halls, nodding gravely as though untouched by scandal. He blesses their monarchs with one hand, pockets their gold with the other, and smiles all the while. His courtiers murmur that foreign kings hate him yet fear to cross him, And perhaps that is the secret. Reputation may wound his dignity, but it also amplifies his aura of danger. In Rome, ordinary people laugh at the Pope. In Europe, rulers grit their teeth. You stand in Madrid as Isabella scolds her ministers, declaring that Rome dishonors the Church. You stand in Paris as nobles toast mockingly to the bull of the Vatican. You stand in London as clerics mutter about corruption. And in each city, you sense the same paradox, disgust twinned with dependency. The Church's spiritual authority suffers. In sermons across Europe, priests lament Rome's scandals. Some whisper that God will punish Christendom for tolerating such a pope. Others preach that reform is inevitable, that corruption has reached its peak. You hear echoes of Savonarola's warnings, repeated now beyond Florence. The sense spreads. The papacy itself is no longer the guardian of faith, but its greatest obstacle. And yet, Alexander continues to win. He manipulates Spain and France, balances Naples and Venice, secures Ferrara through Lucrezia, strengthens Cesare through France. His enemies fume, but his family thrives. You realize that his corruption, though universally condemned, proves astonishingly effective. Kings may sneer, but they still bow. Princes may plot, but they still compromise. His very shamelessness shields him. The mockery persists. European courts joke that the Pope dines better than kings, that Rome is a brothel with mitres, that indulgences are Rome's true export. These jests circulate like wildfire, undermining reverence, but amplifying infamy. You imagine courtiers in Paris or Madrid laughing over wine, yet also lowering their voices when speaking of Cesare's cruelty. Laughter and fear intertwine, just as they do in Rome itself. One night, you stand in a Venetian palace while diplomats debate. One says, "This Pope is a disgrace to Christendom." Another replies, "Yes, but would you rather have him against you or for you?" Silence follows. The question captures the truth. Morality may recoil from Alexander, but politics bows to him. His papacy is not holy, but it is powerful. And in Italy's deadly game, power always wins. And so you walk away from Europe's courts with a heavy realization. The Borgias have turned even scandal into leverage. Kings sneer, poets mock, priests lament, but no one dares sever ties. Alexander VI remains pope, not because he is loved, but because he is unavoidable. His corruption radiates across Europe, staining his reputation yet securing his dominance. By the year 1503, the glitter of Alexander VI's court begins to look more like tarnish. You walk through Rome and feel it. The feasts are still lavish, the banquets still loud, but the laughter has grown brittle. The Pope is older now, heavier, his once energetic stride slowed to a shuffle. Caesar still radiates menace. Lucrezia has built a new life in Ferrara, but Alexander himself seems tired. The excess has caught up with him. Rome waits, whispering that the Borgia era cannot last forever. Enemies circle closer. The Orsini and Colonna families, long humiliated by Cedra's campaigns, bide their time. Foreign rulers grow less patient with Rome's scandals. Even within the Vatican, cardinals whisper of councils to reform the church, hinting at replacing the Pope himself. Alexander, though still cunning, feels the pressure. He clings tighter to Cedra, depending on his son's ruthlessness to maintain control. Father and son, once invincible together, now seem cornered. And then comes the dinner. In August 1503, Alexander and Cesare are invited to a feast hosted by Cardinal Adriano da Corneto. The rumor spreads quickly. The Pope plans to poison his host, seizing his wealth. You hear whispers that a chest of poisoned wine has been prepared, marked secretly for the cardinal's table. But in a twist of fate or divine irony, the plan goes awry. The poisoned wine is mistakenly served to Alexander and Cesare themselves. What happens next remains a matter of legend. But you see the chaos unfold. Alexander falls violently ill, writhing with fever, his body drenched in sweat. Cesare, too, collapses, though his youth and strength give him a chance to recover. Servants rush through Vatican halls, apothecaries summoned, antidotes prepared. Rome buzzes with rumor. Has God finally struck the corrupt Pope? Is this the reckoning Savonarola foretold? For days, Alexander suffers. You hear his groans echo through papal chambers, his once booming voice reduced to whimpers. His skin blisters, his lips blacken, his breath rattles. Some say he repents in those final hours, begging forgiveness for his sins. Others insist he clings to denial, muttering about enemies and conspiracies. The truth, as always with the Borgias, lies tangled in rumour. But one thing is clear: the man who once strode through Rome like a king now lies broken, undone by the very weapon he was said to wield, poison. Caesar, though gravely ill, survives. You picture him half-conscious, his body weakened, his dreams of empire slipping away even as he struggles to rise. He is carried from chamber to chamber, tended by physicians, muttering orders to secure his lands. For once his ruthless energy falters. The son who embodied Borgia ambition nearly dies alongside his father, and his survival feels less like triumph than cruel irony. The Vatican itself descends into frenzy. Courtiers scramble to secure possessions, cardinals whisper about succession, servants plunder what they can before the inevitable death. You walk through the corridors and see chaos, locks broken, jewels seized, papers burned. The papal court, once a theatre of excess, dissolves into panic. Alexander is not yet dead, but Rome already prepares for his absence. Finally, on August 18, 1503, Alexander VI dies. The bells of Rome toll, and the city exhales as though a storm has passed. Some mourn, especially those who profited under his reign. Others celebrate, calling it divine judgment. You stand among the crowds outside St. Peter's and hear mixed cries. The Pope is dead. God has punished Babylon. At last Rome is free. The city feels both relieved and unsettled, unsure whether to grieve or rejoice. His body, bloated and discoloured from fever, becomes another scandal. You watch mourners recoil at the sight, muttering that it looks monstrous, a sign of God's wrath. Some whisper that the corpse swelled so badly it barely fit in the coffin. Others insist the stench filled the basilica, as if the very air rejected him. Whether truth or exaggeration, the story spreads across Europe. The Pope died like his reputation, grotesque, shocking, unforgettable. The funeral is rushed and poorly attended. No grand procession, no elaborate mourning rites. Cardinals mutter prayers quickly, eager to move on. The man who once filled Rome with feasts departs in squalor. You watch his coffin lowered into the ground, and the contrast strikes you, from golden banquets to a lonely grave, from king-like power to decay. It is a reminder that even the most audacious popes cannot cheat death. Rome reacts with its usual cynicism. Street singers compose new songs mocking the Pope's demise, joking that he drowned in his own poison. Taverns roar with laughter as ballads spread. The bull of Borgia gored himself, yet others speak with awe, saying his death proves that God's justice, though slow, never fails. Whether mocking or mourning, the city cannot stop talking. Even in death, Alexander commands attention. Caesar staggers forward, desperate to hold his family's grip on power. But his strength is shattered, his health ruined, his enemies emboldened. The papacy, stripped from Borgia hands, elects Pius III, and then quickly Julius II, Alexander's bitter rival. Caesar scrambles, but the tide turns against him. You see the dynasty crumble almost overnight, undone by the death of its patriarch. Foreign courts react swiftly. Spain and France nod knowingly, claiming God has punished Rome. In Germany, reformers whisper that the Pope's grotesque death proves the Church's corruption. Across Europe, Alexander's demise is not seen as the passing of a holy father, but as the fall of a tyrant. His death becomes propaganda, fuel for those already hungry for reform. And yet, history remembers him vividly. Unlike timid popes forgotten in dusty chronicles, Alexander VI remains infamous. His excesses, his mistresses, his children, his scandals, they etch him into memory as the archetype of papal corruption. You realize that this is his final victory. He is unforgettable, better perhaps to be hated and remembered than pious and forgotten. Standing in the twilight, you hear Romans mutter, "The papacy will never see another like him." Some mean it, as a curse. others almost as a compliment. You sense the truth in both. Alexander VI was not holy, but he was powerful, not virtuous, but unforgettable. His death marks the end of an era, but the shadow of his reign stretches far into the future. And as the bells of Rome fade into silence, you realize that you have witnessed the rise and fall of one of history's most notorious figures, the Pope who treated heaven as currency, who flaunted mistresses, who raised his children as princes, has finally fallen. Yet his story will live on, whispered in taverns, sung in songs, and written in the margins of history as the most perverted pope who ever lived. When Alexander VI finally lies in his grave, his reign does not rest with him. It echoes in Rome's alleys, in Europe's courts, and in centuries of histories yet to be written. You wander through the eternal city after his death, and realize that he has left behind not only scandal, but a new definition of the papacy itself, one indelibly linked to corruption, nepotism, and vice. His legacy is not silence, but a roar that will not fade. The people of Rome remember him through mockery. Street performers continue to sing bawdy verses about chestnuts, mistresses, and poison. Children still play games pretending to be Cesare, chasing rivals with imaginary daggers. Among cardinals, the memory is sharper. Many breathe relief at his death, eager to distance the church from his scandal. Yet they cannot fully erase him, for his impact lingers in every office he sold, every dynasty he empowered, every scar his family carved into Italy. Even his bitter rival Julius II, though he condemns Alexander, cannot avoid imitating his methods, using nepotism, military campaigns, and spectacle to secure papal power. The Borgias may be gone, but their model of ruthless politics remains. Historians in following generations treat him as the archetype of papal corruption. Chroniclers write of his mistresses and children with moral outrage, painting him as the shame of Christendom. Reformation writers seize on his memory as proof that the church is rotten to its core. Luther himself, though he rails more against indulgences than individuals, stands on ground already poisoned by Alexander's scandals. The Borgia Pope becomes Exhibit A in the case for reform. And yet, not all condemnations are simple. Some historians admit grudging admiration for his political skill. After all, he survived 11 years on the papal throne in an Italy riddled with treachery, war, and rival dynasties. Still, the darker side dominates. You read the pamphlets of the 1500s and find Alexander caricatured as Antichrist, as Nero reborn, as the beast of Revelation. Artists sketch him with horns, chroniclers embellish tales of poison, poets lampoon him endlessly. He becomes less a man than a symbol, the embodiment of everything wrong with Rome. In Protestant lands especially, his name is spat like a curse. Lucrezia and Cesare carry his legacy forward. Lucrezia, though she rehabilitates her image in Ferrara, never escapes rumours of incest and poison. Cesare, though brilliant as a general, dies violently in Spain, his ambitions dashed. Their stories become part of Alexander's shadow proof. For many, that sin breeds only ruin. Yet their infamy also ensures that the Borgias remain unforgettable. The family, once a dynasty of power, becomes a legend of corruption. Rome itself bears his imprint. The city you walk through after his death still glitters from his spending. Palaces he built, frescoes he commissioned, fortresses he strengthened. These remain, the irony stings. The same man mocked for orgies and bribes also beautified Rome with art and architecture. His sins funded splendor, and that splendor endures long after the scandals fade. You realize that history is never clean. Corruption and culture often share the same coin. You imagine how he would feel, knowing this legacy. Would he laugh, shrugging at critics as he did in life? Would he boast that infamy is still power, but to be remembered is victory enough? Perhaps. In his mind, survival was proof of success, and though he is dead, his name survives, whispered centuries later as the most perverted pope in history. On that measure, he won. Yet you also feel the weight of the damage. His reign eroded faith in the papacy, fueling doubts that exploded in the Reformation. His corruption became ammunition for those who shattered Christendom's unity. His name darkened the reputation of Rome for generations. In pursuing glory for his family, he may have secured ruin for the church itself. The irony is bitter. A pope who sought to make his dynasty immortal ended up immortalizing the church's corruption instead. As you walk past St. Peter's, you reflect on how his story fits into the wider tapestry of history. Rome has seen saints and sinners, reformers and tyrants, builders and destroyers. Alexander stands firmly in the camp of sinners and tyrants, yet he is remembered as vividly as any saint. History is drawn to extremes, and he provided them in abundance. His papacy, like his life, is a spectacle that cannot be ignored. Even now, the debate continues. Some argue he was merely a product of his age, when corruption was common and nepotism expected. Others insist he exceeded even the worst norms, turning the papacy into a carnival of sin. Both may be true. What is certain is that his reign crystallized the image of the Renaissance Pope as worldly, ambitious, and scandalous. He became the face of an era's contradictions. And so, when history calls Alexander VI the most perverted pope, it is not just an insult but a summary. He perverted holiness into politics, sacraments into sales, family into dynasty, and love into strategy. He turned the papacy itself into theatre, a stage on which scandal played as spectacle. In that sense, his reign is unforgettable, because it reveals the raw truth of power. It corrupts, dazzles, and destroys, all at once. You leave the Vatican one last time, the air heavy with centuries of memory. His tomb is simple, unworthy of his flamboyant life, but his legend fills the city still. You know, as you step into the Roman night, that Alexander VI has become more than a man. He is a symbol, a warning, and a fascination that history will never release. Let your mind release the sharp edges of intrigue, the mistresses, the poison, the laughter, the power struggles. Set them down gently, as though placing heavy objects onto a shelf. You no longer need to carry them. Instead, carry only the lesson that history in all its glory and corruption is still human, and that even the loudest figures eventually fade into whispers. Breathe slowly, as though matching the river's current. Let the rhythm steady you. Let the images blur. Rome becomes a dreamscape now, its scandals dissolving into mist. You're left only with the knowledge that you have travelled through time and returned safely, a witness to a story both shocking and strangely soothing in its distance. And so, close your eyes. The past has spoken, the night is quiet, and the world is still. Sweet dreams.